So testing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, good, 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 good. My my laptop is having a bit of a hard time streaming and having Lightroom and Photoshop open, but it seems to be working okay. I hope the quality is okay as well. I can't check for myself right now because otherwise I would have the audio reverb. I decided to share my entire screen because it's easier to have some context, but it also means that you get to see the OBS behind the scenes software. I hope you don't mind. I see we have about 6 people. My display tells me, but it's 7 p.m. So let's get started. If there's any trouble with the audio or the screen, say something in the chat, and I will try to keep a look at it from time to time. I'm also going to put my computer in do not disturb mode to avoid any embarrassing messages coming in. So first off, thanks everyone for joining here and for joining the workshop as well. Of course, it was I had a really great night. It was really fun. I realized it was a bit short for everything we wanted to do, but in general, I think we got to do most of it. I was happy to see that the feedback was pretty good as well. I'm going to head to Lightroom. So to give you an idea, my editing process is always it starts with Lightroom as a catalog and for doing basic adjustments, and then moving on to Photoshop to do the actual compositing part, basically. I decided to, as an example for tonight, to use mostly the GT3 RS that I shot recently. I also, because I haven't really had a chance to light paint much at Porsche Driven by Dreams yet, so I have one shot here of the Gruppe B prototype, and I have, as a bonus, some Lamborghini ones I did recently with the Sterato as well, which was shot in the desert. Not really. It was shot in the workshop of Lamborghini Brussels, and then I edited it in the desert. So I will show you that process as well. Let me head back to the chat to see if everything's going well. Okay, no one said anything, so I'm assuming that's a good thing. Um, by the way, just casually throwing that in there in case you hadn't seen it yet. It's still not confirmed yet, but supposedly Lewis Hamilton will announce his move to Ferrari by the end of this week, so that should be interesting. Not related at all. Um, so as you can see here, I have a side view. My screen is rather dark, so I'm just going to turn up this one a little bit so you can see it better. So as with most of my shoots, and with most of yours as well, I guess, they're shot either in a parking space or somewhere in a street or in some industrial zone or in a workshop like the Lamborghini. But this one was shot in some kind of industrial zone in Brussels. And I'm guessing most of you will sort of recognize this from the results you had after the workshop as well, is that um, you have your light painted car, but there's also those annoying footsteps unless you walked behind the car with your light on a long stick. And then, of course, you always have that, well, almost always have that big white streak of your light, which is quite annoying. This particular side shot, you can see that there were three general attempts, of which this one worked best, I think. Timing wise, the car is lit from front to back, so that's kind of what we want. For this one, I must have been too fast or no, too slow because the rear is not lit at all. And then there's one I took walking behind the car, which is also quite nice because you really have those lines coming out. But because I wanted to have the car clearly visible in the shot, I decided to go for that middle one, for this one here. And this is what the final picture ended up as. Um, so I hope my mouse cursor is clear as well, and you can sort of see what I'm doing, because it's quite annoying if you don't see menus or anything like that when I right click something, but I think it should be working quite well. So yeah, let's start with this one, and I'm going to show you how I went from this to this. Um, Little word of caution here. Most of my shots, I take out the full surroundings. It depends a bit. Sometimes the surroundings are nice enough, but as you can tell here, it's, rather boring. It's just this parking space, so I figured why not move it into a new space altogether. So we will be going over some things you can do to reuse the actual environment that the car is in as well, but it will be mostly complete compositing, so creating the background around it. So I'm going to open this picture. I can't see the feed now, but I hope you're seeing here. So I'm right clicking it and then I choose edit in and I pick Photoshop, whatever version you have. And let's hope Photoshop actually opens it. Yes, it does. That's good. I will alt tab a bit back and forth between the chats from time to time. So I hope you don't see bright flashes or something when that happens. So here we have a good shot of the car. Like I said, we see plenty of detail. The car is well lit, so that's always nice. And as a bonus, you have a very dark wing, which can be tricky to capture as well. But fortunately, the lighting worked really well on the wing, and you can actually see it, because it would be a shame if we didn't have the wing in that picture. So there's a couple of ways to do this, of course. I must admit, most of the time I take the car from the picture in the most manual way. So I take the lasso tool, something like this, and I start going around the picture, like around the car, manually. So an easy way to do it, if your picture is very dark, is I create a new adjustment layer over the car. So a new adjustment layer and then exposure, and click OK. And then you get this slider in the top right where you can adjust the exposure of the picture. Particularly for tires, they're very dark, so if you don't do this, it's going to be very annoying trying to figure out where the tire starts and stops. So if you create this exposure adjustment layer on top of your picture and you drag the exposure up so it becomes brighter, you actually see a lot more detail in your very dark parts. Now here it's really black, so even then it's pretty much impossible to see the exact point where the tire starts and ends, particularly here in the back. But overall, because you have a dark picture, it doesn't really matter all that much if you miss a few pixels, because in the final result, it will be dark in that area anyway. But of course, the more precise, the better. Something I've started doing more and more is the I think it's, yeah, object selection tool. So in the more recent versions of Photoshop, which I'm guessing everyone has, because we have to deal with Adobe Creative Cloud and it gives you the latest version of Photoshop anyway. You get this object selection tool, and it works two ways. If you select the tool, you can either hover over the car like this, and you will see this pink outline around the car. And it's not perfect by any means. As you can see, it's missing the wing. It's not taking that up. And there's a few weird bubbles on top of the car, so it's not exactly smooth. But I think for tonight it will be a good starter, because we don't want to, watch a webinar where someone is painstakingly manually selecting a car with the lasso tool. So like I said, there's two ways to do it. So either you can hover your mouse over your object, and in this case it will recognize the car, or you can click and drag around the car, and it will kind of do the same thing. It will select it, as you can see. Still not perfect. If I put my exposure adjustment up again, you can see that here on top it missed the, I guess it's a carbon roof, so it's quite dark, and it missed the rear windshield as well, and again, the wing is not in there. So we're gonna have to do some manual adjusting here, but at least it's a good basis. Okay, no complaints yet in the chat, so I'm assuming the feed is still working. What I will do is I will leave the car selected, like the object selection tool did select it, and now I have my lasso tool selected. Apologies, getting a bit of a cold. And while pressing Shift, I will expand the selection. So now I'm going to add the windshield here and add that part to it, because it's obviously missed the windshield. So it's the lasso tool. If you don't know it very well, it's quite easy to use. You just click where you want your selection points. If you want to add to an existing selection, you press Shift and then you start clicking. Or if you want to subtract, you click Alt, I guess. Which on Mac, I know it from muscle memory, but looking at my keyboard, I guess it's the Option key. But definitely correct me if I'm wrong. So like this, we will add the windshield with the Shift pressed in, and now the windshield is in our selection as well. And we'll do the same with first the rear window, which is actually Plexi, if I'm not mistaken, on a GT3 RS. And I will expand right away to the wing. Little details on cars are always a bit of a hassle to select them, because you obviously have to be a bit precise with how you're clicking. I know a lot of people like to do this with a like a pen tool, or even with like a physical pen. What do you call those? Man, my memory is not great today. Anyway, the hardware pen selection tool. Oh, I missed the spot there. Bear with me. I'm trying to keep this as short and less boring as possible. Okay. We almost have it. There we go. And I double click, and then it finishes the selection. And then of course here we have a hole. So yeah, now I press Option or Alt on Windows, and this way we remove the hole from our selection. There we go. Now, as you can see, it also messed up a bit here in the rear. Yeah. And that's gone too now. I think our wheels are a bit goofy. They definitely don't look right, so I'm going to adjust that here as well, pressing Alt. There we go. And same for this part. then the bottom seems to be quite alright. It took the rocker panels with it, and I'm just going to remove that as well. Here in the front it messed up a little bit. It didn't take the entire bumper. It should be something like this. And then this needs to go as well. As you can see, it's a bit confused here because my very vague footstep is in front of the tire, so it didn't get the tire shape very correctly. And there we have it. Okay, one little mistake here with the bumper. It missed the outer lip, and then it took a bit too much here, so we're going to remove that. And that looks about right. If I turn off the brightness, and yeah, okay. So we have a selection of our car now. And as you see, it's just one layer. This is my raw file from that particular view. And what I do usually is quite simply, I start by duplicating this layer. So I right click it and I click duplicate. Background copy, that's fine. So I have two layers now. And on this duplicated layer, I do a layer mask and reveal selection. We don't see anything yet because the other layer is still behind it, but if I remove the other layer, you can see we have just the car, which is exactly what we wanted. And then the interesting part starts. So let me go back to Lightroom and show you what happened to this picture. So you can see there's a floor, there's a shadow as well, which we will have to create. And what I like to do is a very dark background. So in this case, it's pretty much entirely black. And then something that, in my opinion, always works really well is to create a blurred color, well, sort of a light behind the car. It makes it pop, especially if the color is somehow in the car. In this case, the wheels are red, so it's that kind of red. What works well, I think I have, well, I don't have an example now, but for example, if I have a blue car, I will often use like a blue light behind it. But sometimes it's a bit much to have the same background light and the same car color. So I try to vary a little bit. It can be fun to do opposing colors as well. So if you have a yellow car, to put like a blue light behind it, for example, go nuts. You can, oh yeah, thanks Antoine, option on Mac, indeed. So you can go crazy there a little bit. Let's start from the bottom up. So in this case, let's start with the floor. You can do several things here. If you really want to keep your original floor, you can do that for sure, and you can just skip this step. And it makes it easy because you can also then reuse the shadow of the car. Shadow can be a bit tricky to recreate, although I always keep it pretty simple. You'll see in a bit. In my case, using the floor here, as you can see, it would be a lot of hassle because I would have to remove a boatload of footsteps. They go all the way up till here. And I like a very clean floor. So what I often do is I have a few presets that I've collected through the years. There's actually only 3 that I mostly use. And you can sort of see the pattern in these floors. So it's always a bit of a dark floor, but there's always a lighter part, which is where the light painting would have happened, basically. So you see it in this one. There's here in the bottom. There's that lighter part. We have a pavement texture here that I quite often use, which also has a lighter part here, which is where the car would have been light painted. And then I have a somewhat cleaner studio floor where you also have that light part. I believe for this one, I created the floor myself. It's just a gradient, so a dark gray to somewhat lighter gradient created in Photoshop, which I'm able to do right now as well, just to give you an idea how you can easily recreate the floor yourself. And it's surprisingly easy. Fortunately, light painting is often quite dark, so it gives you quite a bit of freedom and you can get away with a lot of things. If we were editing photos, if we were compositing photos that we shot during the day, it would definitely be a lot harder because you would have to pay a lot more attention to direction of light, to shadows, the reflections, but mostly shadows because shadows are still quite hard to get right. But fortunately for us, we're using, we're editing light painting photos. So, like I said, we can actually get away quite easily. So what I will do is we have that top layer here with just our car. And behind that top layer and the background, I will create a new layer by Command Shift N. And I'll just call it, let's call it floor. As you can see here in Lightroom, it's still pretty dark. It's a pretty dark gray, but because it goes from, pretty much darkness to that dark gray, it does look like it's lit. So I think it's going to be something like this. I'm going to take my color picker and let's go for, yeah, so I'm using hex code 202020. And then we'll use the gradient tool or G on both Windows and Mac, I think. And let's see what gives if we drag that down. Well, it's still obviously way too dark, so let's make it a bit lighter. So the system that Photoshop uses nowadays has changed a little bit. Oh yeah, no, it was actually set to black instead of gray. And this already looks pretty good to me. I know it looks terrible, but you'll see what's going to happen in a little bit. So we have a gradient here that's just one color to full transparency. And the one color is the color I just picked, so 2020, a dark gray. And dragged it over our background on this new layer on floor. Like I said, I know it looks terrible right now, but that's mostly because we don't have a shadow for our car yet. It's going to look much better in a little bit, you'll see. Still no complaints in the chat. Okay, that's good. And to draw the shadow, what I like to do, and what typically really works for side views, but also for three-quarter views, if we go back to our full picture, so with the environment, so I will click Shift and I will click on the mask here on our car layer. You can see that the shadow is quite straight. It's basically just a black bar that's underneath the car. If I turn the exposure up a little bit, with the only caveat, although it's quite easy to do, you see that here at the back and typically at the front as well, but it doesn't really show here as well. It gets a bit blurry. So the shape of our shadow in this perspective is actually really quite easy. I will leave this off the mask for now, so you can see that I'm drawing over the shadow, and I will create a new layer on top of it, and I will call it shadow. There we go. And next I will take my pen tool, or P, I believe. Yep. And I'm going to take black because our shadow is entirely black. There we go. And I always start off first by clicking right underneath the left tire, like so. And then I will make a second click here underneath the right tire. So basically a line from the underside of the left tire that goes all the way to the right tire. And then we continue our shape, and you'll see what I'm going to be doing here. I click and I immediately drag out my anchor point like so. So to mimic the actual shadow, and I let go. And I will do the same here. So I will click here again. Don't mind the round shape of the shadow at the top because it's going to be behind our car in a bit anyway, so you won't see it. All we need to think about is the shadow part that's underneath the car. So I've added this one, and then I will do the same again while clicking in our first anchor point. I will click again and drag it like so, and mimic again the shape of the shadow. I hope you can sort of see it. I have my outline, my border on the shape, so you should be able to see where it's going. And I just hover it over the shadow until it has that same shape. So of course our shadow has to go behind the car, so I will drag this layer back here. I will actually rename the car layer car so it's not as confusing. So you don't see it now, but now I'm going to shift click the mask on our car again. And then we have this. We're getting somewhere. Of course, our exposure is still up. There we go. And as you can see, we have a somewhat realistic shadow now. Not entirely yet. We're going to make a few changes to that. But as you can see, the image is already sort of convincing. It looks like this might be, an actual photo almost. There's two things I like to do with the shadow. One, if you go to your shadow shape, in your properties window, I have it here top right, but you might have to enable it by going to window properties. You see feather, and feather, if you don't know, it's basically blurring the edges of a shape. So you can see when I'm dragging this all the way up, it gets really blurry. Of course, we don't want it that blurry, but what I like to do is to have a feather of 2 pixels because a perfectly straight shape is not realistic. It doesn't happen like that in real life. So I like to give it a bit of a blur. So I think 2 is a bit of the golden ratio of having a blur, and it just makes it look a bit more natural. And then what we're going to do is first, for this exercise, we have to make sure our image is straight because as you can see, I have a terrible tripod and quite often I shoot a picture quite crooked and I have to manually adjust it. So I'm going to make sure it's completely horizontal first. And I'm going to do that by first, if you don't have your ruler set up, so you have to press Command R, or you can go somewhere in your Photoshop settings and somewhere, no, I think you can just go to View, I guess. Yeah, and then you can enable here rulers, and what it does is it adds the ruler to your top here. You can see the pixel values and here to the left as well. And one way to make sure something is entirely horizontal is you select your move tool, so V, and you click the ruler at the top and you drag it down and it will create a guide. So this guide is completely horizontal, and by doing that we can see that our car is actually quite crooked. So to make sure everything is straight, I select all my layers. So these top 3, don't worry about the background layer because we really don't need it anymore. So I just take the car, the shadow, and the floor. We're gonna have a problem with the floor in a bit because, like I said, Photoshop changed their gradient tool, so we're gonna have to change that manually in a bit. And then I press Command T, or you can do Edit Transform. And I zoom out a little bit, you see the little moving anchors. And by moving your mouse outside the field of view, you see you have your rotate things, and I can start to rotate the car until it's entirely horizontal. If we zoom in a little bit on the guide, I think it's still a little bit crooked. Let's see. I think this is pretty straight, yeah. And press Command Enter, and it will put it in place nice and straight. The reason I had to put the car straight Let me check the chat first. Yep, all good. The reason I had to put the car straight is because I'm going to be putting a horizontal motion blur on the shadow. Like I just said, if we look at the original picture and I turn the exposure up, you can see that not so much the front, but the rear is a bit more blurry. It's because your light is moving beyond the car and the shadow is no longer hard, but it gets a bit blurry. And it gives it a bit of a realistic vibe. So it's quite easy to achieve that effect because we just take our shadow and we go to filter here at the top, we go to blur, and we go to motion blur. It's going to ask you to convert your shape to a smart object, which is fine. And as you can see, you have an angle that you can enter here. And here we want our angle to be 0 because it needs to be entirely horizontal. And it depends a bit on the kind of picture, but I think a good value of doing that motion blur is, yeah, I think the way it was set, let's say 250 pixels, depending on the size of your photo as well, of course. You click OK, and now our shadow is quite realistic. Of course, one problem here is that our car is still in infinity because it's standing on a floor, and that floor seems to be extending all the way into infinity, which is not a realistic look. Unless you like this look, then go for it. But what we're going to do is create our backdrop over our floor. So here we have our floor layer, which is our gradient. And like I said, you might have to adjust this manually to make sure the gradient is actually completely straight, going from top to bottom. And you can also do that in your properties window here. So you can see the angle. Right now it's set at minus 90.10. And I will just make sure that it's set to 90 and nice and neatly positioned. So we have our floor layer here, and I'm going to create a new layer. So again, Command Shift N or Control Shift N, I suppose, on Windows. And I'm going to select color black, entirely black, and back to our gradient tool, because the way we're going to create our backdrop is again a gradient. So nice and easy. So here I will select this one, so black to transparent. And I will again do the same. I will put my cursor somewhere here, I think, somewhere in the middle of the car. And I'm going to drag it down while holding Shift to make sure it's nice and straight. And this seems about right. My experience is that the image will always be a bit nicer if the floor continues a little bit behind the car. If I change this gradient and I let it start lower, you get a bit this. I mean, for this image, it works quite well as well, I have to say. But most of the time, it gives it more depth if you let your gradient start a bit higher and you see more of the floor. But I'm a little bit surprised at how nice this looks, so I will keep it a bit lower than usual. Make sure you don't go too low because obviously you still want to see your shadow of the car as well. Otherwise, it's just kind of bathing in darkness. But yeah, this is to me seems quite right already. Few minor details that we might be able to adjust. One other thing that I forgot to mention. When I was talking about the shadow shape, I told you about the feather. So to give the shadow a little bit of a blurry edge to make it more realistic. And that's something I like to do on the mask of my car as well. If I go to the mask here, so on our car layer, here's our white mask that's showing only the car part. I like to put feather on 1 pixel. It makes it less hard and it makes it look a bit more natural. Like the car is not sort of blasted into a setting, but actually blends in a little bit more because the edges are not as hard, which in an actual photograph, those edges would not never be entirely focused and sharp, they'll also always be a little bit blurry just because of how camera sensors work. So this gives it a bit more realism in that sense. So we have a car, we have a floor, the car has a shadow, we have a backdrop, and if we look at this shot, particular shot, the only thing that's missing in this case is what I like to call the background light, basically. Um, and that's quite easy to do as well. Of course, the light is going to be behind the car, so I'm going to go on our shadow layer and then press Command Shift N again, or Control Shift N on Windows. So we have a layer here now, and I will call it light. I will also rename the layer that we just created as background backdrop. Let's call it backdrop. There's some noisy tourists in front of my house. If you hear anything, my apology. So back to the lights layer. And let's pick something similar to what I just showed you in Lightroom, which is the red. So I will use the color picker a little bit to figure out sort of a red shade that's coming from the wheels, something nice and light. And let's drag that up a little to make it a bit more vibrant, something like this. And then I simply go to the elliptical marquee tool. So it's this one. It's basically for drawing circles. And my way of working is always the same way, and it's always quite simple. I make a little bit of a cigar shape, something like this, behind the car. Quite works quite well. And then I fill that. So on Mac, it's Option Backspace, or on Windows, I suppose it's also Alt Backspace. Or you can just right click it, I think, and then select Fill. And I select foreground color and press OK. So now we have this red cigar behind the car. Sometimes this looks already quite nice to just have a colored square or circle shade behind the car. But now what I like to do is I move it behind the car entirely, and then again I go to filter and blur, and then I pick a Gaussian blur. And you can go pretty far with the blur. I think in this case, yeah, it's about 550 pixels of radius, so it blurs it quite extensively, which I don't mind. And I just hit OK. And the only thing that's not right now is that red light is streaming below your car as well, onto the floor, onto your shadow. Obviously, we don't want that. So we're going to create a quick layer mask on that light layer to make sure it only shows on top of the car. So I'm going to pick here, layer mask, reveal all. And then while I'm in the mask, I'm going to take my gradient tool again, which is still set to black. And I'm going to take somewhere here at the very bottom of the car, I'm going to click, and then while holding shift, I'm going to drag it upwards, something like that. If you want, you can detach your layer mask here by clicking on that link icon. And this way you can move your light around and see a little bit what's a good position for it. I think in this case it's still a little bit too dark. I wouldn't mind it being a little bit brighter. So I will press Command U in this case, or Control U, and here you can quickly change the saturation of the red. So I'm going to drag that up a little bit, and maybe the lightness as well, just a tiny little bit, so you can see it a bit better, because it's obviously quite a dark picture, but we want it to jump out a little bit. And I think if we look now at Lightroom, it's yeah, the floor is a bit more lit in front and the back. So if you want, you can darken it up a little bit before and behind the car. I actually do prefer this a bit more over this one. I think this one is you have too much of a sort of bright blob in the middle and then nothing. Where here you have more balance over the image. So yeah, I kind of like how this has turned out. Um, after that, you can simply save. So Command S or Control S, I suppose, on Windows, and it's saving. Be aware that these files can get quite big, especially if you're using multiple layers in one. But overall, they're yeah, because of the darkness, they're not that heavy compared to uh, more general pictures. Okay, it has saved, and there it is in Lightroom. My Lightroom editing is typically very limited. I like to play around with the white balance a bit. I think this image works quite well with a more with a cooler white balance than a warmer one. Be aware that, especially for light painting shots, so dark photos, if you go to cooler, your image will typically get a bit darker and has to do with color theory and the way our eyes perceive the color blue mostly. It's a lot darker to our eyes than other colors like yellow or red. So the colder you go, the darker it's going to get in general. Okay, that was the first one. Um, I'm just going to check if anyone has any questions or um, requests for the one that we just did. Okay, so far nothing, unless the stream stops. I hope not. Okay, was that interesting for everyone so far? Oh, I forgot. There's a bit of delay on this stream, so you guys are only seeing what I'm saying now, I suppose. And yes, I'm eating a banana. Sorry, hungry. Hmm. Antoine, yes, I do. I was talking to a few people at the workshop about this, about using a CPL filter. And yes, I use a CPL filter because it generally makes my job a bit easier to remove reflections from the car. And I know a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but some people prefer not to use a CPL filter. So a polarizer filter, for those who don't know, is a filter that you put on your lens to remove reflections from shiny surfaces like cars. And it's useful. It definitely is useful, but it does give a bit of a distinct look in your pictures. And some people don't like that. I don't mind. I think it's a good look, and I think it works especially well on light painting. Um, so yeah, I use a CPL filter. Um, and to answer your other question, the gradient for the floor is straight. Yeah, definitely. So if I go back to that floor layer, you can see here that in the properties window for the gradient, the angle is set to -90, so it's entirely straight. Um, it's of course because we have a side-on view, so you want your floor to be straight there and your background as well. Otherwise, it's just going to look crooked. So yeah. Um, Eve, do I use multiple pictures at first? Um, Quite often, yes. This example was a simple one with just one exposure that we used. But for the next one, we'll pick out a few. I have one with well, you'll see it in a bit. So that's a bit of a different way of working, but in general, it works the same way. I will show now actually. I'm going to close this one so my scratch disks don't fill up. Um, and the next shot I was going to propose to be doing is this one. And to answer your question, Eve, this one is made up out of, I believe, this photo. Yep. But combined with one separate shot of the rear LED bar. I like to shoot the lights separate because, as you can imagine, for the rear lights it's okay, but especially for the front lights, if you capture that with 4 or 6 second exposure, it's going to be really overblown and it typically doesn't work really well. So it's always better to shoot the lights with a shorter exposure, especially the front lights. Um, just so you have, how do I say this? If you shoot it with that long exposure, you're going to have a very bright blob because so much light is coming in. So I like to shoot the light painting part like so, like here, without the lights on, and then the lights separate with a shorter exposure. I'm just having a look at this one. So to open two photos, because we want both this one and the one with the lights on, you simply select both. So on Mac, that's Command, and you select the two pictures, or on Windows, Control and select the two pictures, and right click again, and then edit in. And instead of edit in Photoshop, you're going to pick open as layers in Photoshop. And he's simply going to create a file now where those two pictures are both layers. So if we go to Photoshop, it's still opening. Still loading. And you can see now the top layer is now our car, and the bottom layer is the car in the dark with the lights on. I'm going to swap them, so I'm going to drag the lights to the top, and we're going to disable that for now. I'm only going to touch that later. And as you can see in Lightroom, the final shot that this ended up being is somewhat similar to the side shot we just did. It's a newly created floor. For the purpose of demonstration, I will use one of the floor pictures that I have here just to change things up a bit. But it also has the red background lighting and it's on a dark background as well. So not that much change there. So back in Photoshop, we're going to start by doing the same thing as we did. We're going to start selecting the car. I will give the layers names. So this will be car, and this will be lights. Well, I'll call it LED bar. And I'm going to take the object selection tool again and simply drag around here. And it did somewhat of an okay job. I will turn the, well, I'll do it in a bit. It didn't get everything right. It missed the holes in the spoiler, for example. So I will quickly, seems about right. I don't know why I just got a OBS notification. Okay, well, let's stick with that for now. So again, I will create a layer mask to just show the car. So layer mask and reveal selection. And there we have a nice white GT3 hanging in nothingness. There we go. So like I said, instead of creating our floor ourselves now, well, I can show both, I guess. Let's start with creating our own floor. So I will create a layer behind the car and call it floor 1. And we will again use that dark sort of gray thing for our gradient. There we go. This picture is, I have this recent thing where I like to shoot from really low. And you can see that the floor sort of starts just like in between the, well, like at the bottom of the car. So we're going to do something like this. Sorry, I'm doing it the wrong way. I'm still a bit sleepy. We're going to wait. First we need a black background. That's why it's not working. Let's create a new layer first and call it black. So I'm going to press X here so to switch the colors around, and then take 100% black, and I do Option backspace or Alt backspace like on Windows. That's better. We create another new layer, Command Shift N, and call it floor 1. And I'm going to press X again to go back to my dark gray background color. And this time we're going to do it like this. So the actual light part of the light painting here, it's a very shallow zone. It's a very thin layer. So that's why we start like a little bit like here. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did for the other picture. We're going to recreate the shadow of the car. So I'm first going to add an adjustment layer, exposure. Press OK, just to make the car a bit brighter again. And then I'm going to shift click again the mask on the car. And you can see that the shadow of the car, it's a lot harder to see here because we shot from such a low angle that it's actually only a very thin kind of thing. So this might not always be easy. I think I had to mess around a bit with this to get the shape quite believable, but we'll try. So again, we're going for the pen tool, or P, and make sure that you have black color selected, like so. And we're going to go behind the car and create a new layer, and we will call it again shadow. And then we're going to have a look at how we can recreate this shadow. So this will require a few more points than the other one. I think for the side view we only had like 4 points in the shadow. But if you zoom in, you should be able to sort of get the shape right. And then here, for example, the shadow stops on the right and then goes right back to the left. So it's quite easy. We just click here and we drag it out like this. So we have like a little point there at the bottom. There we go. And then I just click on to here and then to here. And then again here I do the same. I drag it out till I get this very sharp point at the edge. I hope you can see it. And then we simply close it like so. So now if we turn back on our mask, we have something like this. It's not what I would call the best shadow I've ever done, but I think it looks somewhat believable. And of course we have to turn our exposure off again, like so. Something that's bothering me now is that the car is not in the center of the picture. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to first turn on our LED bar layer as well, so I can select it and drag it. And then I'm going to select the top layers, not the black one, because that can stay, but all the rest above it, I'm going to select the move tool and I'm going to move it a little bit more to the center, like so. And then it should be a bit more in the middle, like this. Um, to have a realistic view on our shadow, first let's set up our feathering. So this is our shadow shape again, and I'm going to put this on 2 pixels feathering, so it's a little bit more naturally blurred. And then I'm going to select the mask of our car, and I'm going to give it that 1 pixel feather so that the car is a little bit more blended in into the environment. And in order to sort of see if the shadow is believable, I think we need to see our backdrop. So in this case, we're going to make our black backdrop again. So on top of our floor layer, I'm going to recreate a new one, Command Shift N or Control Shift N, and I'm going to call it backdrop. And I'm going to go back to my gradient. I'm going to select black as my color. There we go. Pick the right gradient. And then let's start dragging it vertically again. So I'm going to start somewhere here, I think, quite low, and drag it down while holding Shift. And something like this seems about right. So now we get that clean studio look. I guess the advantage of drawing the floor yourself, like in this case, is that it's always very neat. I'm going to show you the example now where, for example, let's do the pavement or maybe the studio, I'm going to drag studio.jpg in here, like so. And I'm going to move it behind the backdrop because the backdrop is always over the floor. So now you can see the studio floor is obviously too small. So I will use Command T, and then I hold Alt or Option on Mac to sort of drag it horizontally. And in this case, our floor is very flat because of that low angle. So you don't see a lot of floor, you just see like a very thin line of floor. So I will drag the floor vertically like this. So I'm compressing it vertically. And I think something like this is probably realistic. And then Command Enter, and then drag the floor up a bit. And you can see now that this looks somewhat realistic. Um, I guess it's a bit of that balance. On one hand, this looks realistic, but it's never as clean as our pure gradient. The gradient is definitely cleaner. You don't have any dirt or textures in there. So at the same time, this to most eyes will look a bit more realistic. So it depends a bit on what you want to do. My floor here is not tall enough to go all the way to the bottom because I compressed it vertically because I want it to be very thin. So what I typically do is I create a new layer on top of this, so Command Shift N, and I will create one last black gradient that sort of runs from here, from the edge, going up, so that it's a bit blended in instead of just stopping at a very straight line like that. And that's, yeah, the result of it. Like I said, we're going to recreate the same red light behind it. It's going to be a bit of a different shape now because the car is it's more a circle than a cigar, basically. So again, I will create a new layer here, Command Shift N, and call that our background light. And I will again take the red from the tires. So, yeah, make it a bit brighter. And I'll just use this one again, the elliptical marquee tool. And it's going to be more like in our previous picture, it was like this, like a cigar. And now I will do something more like this to follow the shape of the car. And I'll go Option Backspace or Alt Backspace on Windows. And then again, we do our filter blur, Gaussian blur, set at 550 about. Okay. Computer is having a hard time. Move it down a little bit. And then again, we do layer, layer mask, we show all, and then with a black gradient tool, we make sure that the light is not coming out of the bottom of the car like so. And that looks maybe a bit higher, something like this. And then you again get a nice poppy glow from behind the car. And then to answer Eve's question in particular, let me see if there's other questions. No. This was a setup of two different exposures. One was the car and one was the lights. To add the lights to this picture, it's the simplest thing in the world. First, we're going to turn on our LED bar layer, so that layer that was on top, where you have that red, nice glow coming from the light and also reflecting here on the spoiler in the back. Let me turn the brightness up a bit, maybe you can see better. You see the nice red reflection on the Porsche logo on the bottom of the wing as well. So we've turned on that layer LED bar, and we start by setting the layer style. So from the drop down here in your layers, it's currently set to normal, but you simply pick lighten. What that does, if you don't know layer styles, the lighten one, everything that's brighter than the layer below it, it adds, and all the rest remains out. So it only takes the brighter parts. And because our LED bar here is brighter than the one in the picture below, because there it's not on, the car is off, so it's just dark there, it's going to add that to the picture. But as you can see, it's not just taking those parts, it's also adding the street lights that was in that photo. It's adding the reflection of the front lights onto the curb there. It's adding the terribly ugly license plate lights, which you always want to remove. So we're going to only select the good parts and the parts that we want from this layer, meaning the LED bar in the back and the reflection on the wing, although we don't really see the reflection, unfortunately, because the wing is quite dark in the underlying picture. But let's start with that LED bar. So we have that layer selected now, and we're going to create a layer mask again, but this time we're going to go for layer, layer mask, and we're gonna hide it all because we only want to paint in the parts that we like. So as you can see, the mask here is completely black, meaning it's hiding everything. And then we take our brush, or B, and yeah, I think it's about the right size. You might have to change the size a bit by going here top left and doing this. I always do it with the keyboard shortcuts. It's square brackets on the Mac keyboard. And we're going to make our paintbrush white because we have a black mask now and we want to see some things from that layer. So I'm going to press X here to change my colors from black to white. So now I have a white brush and I simply start painting over our LED bar like so. Make sure your opacity and your flow of your paintbrush here at the top, they're all set to 100, otherwise it's only going to show part of it and we want to show it all. So there we go. And yeah, if you want more things lit up in this picture, for example, if you want your street light, you can start painting that here and you have the street light in the picture. If you want the terrible license plate lights here as well, you can start painting that in, but I prefer to keep that out. So yeah, that was a simple example of having two separate exposures. One other reason why often I work with multiple exposures is something that's a little bit bothering about this picture, and you might have noticed, it's that you see the light in the reflection of the window. If you take multiple exposures and you make sure that there's one where your window is entirely black, you could, for example, load that up in Photoshop as well as another layer. And then you could, using a mask, you can just, for example, from that layer, you could only select this window portion, which is then black in that layer, to come through. So you don't have that ugly light. Now, until a year ago, your best bet would be to press Shift Backspace for a fill, and then you have your content aware fill, and you click OK, and then you would sort of have to pray that it was deleting your white reflection, but as you can see, it's not doing a very good job at it. But of course, now in the last year, we have the AI feature in Photoshop, which my experience is that it works quite a bit better than the generative. No, not the generative. The God, what's it called again? The content aware fill. Um, so if you just select here your light reflection, we're going to do a generative fill. And you can either enter a query here saying, for example, remove the white reflection from the window or something. But apparently they advise you if you want to remove something rather than generate, it's better to just click generate without entering anything. I'm sure it's not going to work now because I'm showing you guys, but let's see what happens if I click generate. Okay, not too bad. It always gives you three variants, so if you want, you can sort of go through them. I guess first one is okay-ish. Uh, I'm not gonna do this big one, the big wide one here, because, like I said, I'm sure it's going to fill, but you can figure it out yourself how you remove it. But of course, like I said, the safest way to not have reflections in your window is to make sure that you have one exposure where there are no reflections, and then you just mask that out in your entire composition. Um, so let's put the mask back on so that we just have the car. And there it is. I think it's fairly similar to the original one, to this one. Uh, yeah, a few changes here and there, but not too bad. So yeah, work-wise, that was no, I clicked the wrong application. Work-wise, it was similar to the flow that we used for the side view. It changes a bit depending on the angle. Like here, we have that very low angle. Um, and that can make it a bit more tricky because you have to think a bit more about how far your floor is going to go, how far your backdrop is going to go. But in general, yeah, the same principles sort of account for those scenarios. So this is the one we just did. This was the other one. So yeah, quite similar actually, with brighter lights and stuff. So that was yeah, the my most typical workflow for exterior shots was this. And as you can see, it's not that many steps. It took a bit longer now because I'm explaining it, but I think in general, if you get the hang of this workflow, I think you only spend 10 to 15 minutes on a photo, best case. And of course, there will be trickier scenarios as well. But yeah, for the most part, I think it's quite straightforward. You uh, take the car out, you draw the floor, you draw the backdrop, you draw the shadow, and you create a, well, I create my background light. Again, if you prefer to keep your original setting and you just want to have just you know the car in its setting without all the problems with like this, for example, it's quite easy. Or you can do a combination of both. For example, if this is our original picture, we could, for example, we keep the floor, but we don't use the backdrop. So if I disable my backdrop, something like this, and remove this as well. And why am I not seeing? Oh yeah, of course, I don't have the original picture in there. Let me show you. For example, take this out as well. So this is a combination of we still have our studio floor here, but combined with the actual environment. So we have our street light there. Let me turn on the exposure a bit. There's like a sign there on the left, whatever. So obviously in this case, the most annoying thing would be the white streak that you have to get out of your setting, and often yourself as well. Uh, you can see that when I turn the exposure all the way up, you can see, I think it's my hand or something, or like part of the lamp that's moving, and my leg as well. Um, so if we turn that off, it's not that bad, and you mostly just have that white streak. Unfortunately for us, the white streak is also quite easy to remove from any setting. Well, I typically take the lasso tool again, so just select around it, and you can see that I'm not moving too close to the light, and that's because it's hard to see on when you're looking at it, but when you start to measure the colors around the light streak, it's actually it's not black here and then all of a sudden here it's white. It actually goes from bright white to like a little bit lighter gray to darker gray to darker gray to darker gray to black. And if you go too close to your light and you want to remove it, your Photoshop is going to be a bit confused because it's not sure what it's being told. Like, do I just have to remove the entire white part? And if you do that, it's going to leave these weird dark gray things. So one tip, if you want to remove your streaks, go far enough in your selection so that and I might actually be a little bit too close already. It's a bit hard to see because I have the lights on here. Um, so I have it here, and then again, like we just did with the window, you have two scenarios. You have either Shift Backspace. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. Where is my layer? Here's my layer. So of course, make sure you select the layer that your streaks are on. You do Shift Backspace, and you do Content Aware Fill again. Let's see what happens. Yeah, you can see it did a pretty good job at removing it. Again, if you turn your exposure up quite a bit, you will start to see the sort of crap there in the background. Like it's made some clouds here, and you can still see my arm and stuff. But in a dark enough picture, it won't really be visible. And of course, the other scenario again is what we just did. Use the generative fill, the AI, um, and just click generate without entering a query. And while it's generating, Ben, I didn't notice, but are they that were they that dirty at Outer World? Next time, let's clean the cars. Um, yeah, one thing, of course, with light painting that's a bit of a downside is you see a lot of the detail, and especially dust is quite hard. You don't see it on these typical exterior shots like we're doing now. Oh, look at that. The AI created an extra street light for us. No, thank you. Let's look at the second prompt. It's not perfect. Yeah, neither of them are perfect, but if you fiddle enough, I think you'll be able to get it out. Um, so yeah, for if you want to keep your original setting. Good to know I don't have to go out looking for a studio to rent if I want to light paint again. No, absolutely not. That's the most fun part about light painting is you can do it everywhere. As long as it's dark, of course. That's the only limitation. But I think that's what I like about it most is that I've only shot in a studio once and it was quite nice. It was the Lexus LFA. But if I had to deal with all those logistics every time, like getting a car to a studio and setting up, I don't know, whatever, I would get depressed. And the fact that you can just drive a car anywhere in the dark and light paint it wherever you want and then turn it into a studio, it's definitely a big plus. Eve, what do you do with the license plate? Good question. It varies greatly. In this case, I agree it's not the prettiest. So you can either make it very dark here. We can have a look for this one and see if we can simply, um, if we create a new exposure layer. I'm getting very sniffy during the webinar, my apologies. Click exposure, okay. And we're going to start by dragging the exposure all the way down until we don't really see the license plate anymore. Something like this. Like you still see a little bit of the outline. Um, and then I'm going to fill the mask of that exposure layer with black so that it's all hidden. And then we do the same thing again with a white brush. Um, in your brush settings, you can pick the hardness. And for this, you want to set the hardness to 0. So it's going to be very The edges are not going to be very hard. For example, if I set my brush very hard, oh, wrong shortcut, um, you would get this, but what we want is this, very soft. So if you make your brush a bit smaller and we paint over the license plate here, like there's a couple of levels you can do it. I like to keep it quite subtle, and I like, for example, that you can still tell that there's a license plate there, but it's not very visible, and you still see the Porsche.be thing at the bottom, which is either nice. Or, of course, if you want to get creative, you can make your own custom license plate, which is quite easy. What I quite often do is I create a black license plate with just the logo of the brand on it. So to quickly show you, if you use the shape tool and you go to the rectangle tool here, and let's take black, so I'm pressing X, so we're going to draw a black rectangle, which is going to look a little bit something like this. Yep. It has no fill, so I'm going to make it black here, and I'm going to give it rounded edges. So let's say 20 pixels, something like this. Maybe a bit more, I guess. Wait, it's not rounding it. Why are you not rounding stroke? Is that the problem? Well, actually, you can just do this as well, and it will create rounded corners. So now we have something that sort of resembles a license plate. And then I'm just going to make it a very quick demo, but if you go to Google Images and you take the Porsche logo, for example, let's see if we can, actually, let's do the logo type. Yeah, this will work. That top one, well, it's a stock photo, so let's not. Okay, well, there's not many good options. Just copy the image. It's not very high res, but it's not going to matter that much because the license plate is quite small. And I'm just going to take that black Porsche portion, oh, and cut that out. So I'm just going to select the inverse of this layer and delete that so that I only have this part left, just for quick demonstration purposes. And then I typically merge those two. So now I have that Porsche logo type on a black background, and I have the license plate itself. And I select them both, and I press Command E or Control E on Windows, I suppose, to merge those layers. And now I have one layer. So this is my license plate. And then this is the tricky part that I never really like. It's you have to go to edit. Well, you don't have to, but it's the way I do it. And I go to not perspective, but to distort. And now you can move basically the edges, your corners of your license plate. So you can move them to wherever the real life license plate is. So I moved the bottom right there and the top right there. And again, it's sort of okay for now, but it's you know, I typically take a bit more time to get the positioning right. And of course, it's a bit too bright now. So if you press, for example, quickly Control U or Command U, you can take the lightness down a bit to make it a bit more realistic. That way, you just have like a Porsche logo there. Um, I end up doing this quite a bit because obviously a lot of owners don't like their license plate in pictures or in a book. Funny story, one of the cars in the book has the full-blown license plate in there, and the owner didn't know about it, and he was not too happy about it at first, and then afterwards he thought it was quite funny. But yeah, always make sure that whoever you're shooting is okay with either having their license plate in there or drawing something over the license plate or darkening it out. So yeah, and that's about it with the license plate process. A lot of dust meant. All right. This is going rather smoothly. At least that's how it feels to me. I don't know how you guys feel, but um, in the meantime, I'm going to have a look at some other shots. So here we have the three-quarter front shot with again the license plate. You can easily put the Porsche one over that, which has the exact same logic as the shot we just did. Quite a low perspective that it's shot from. I turned the car a bit on purpose to give it a bit of a dynamic feel, which can work out quite well as well. Here I definitely used two exposures for the windows. So this I think is the carpet, the light paint shot, and this is the window shot that was used. Um, the reason why I used this shot for the light painting is because it has some nicer shadows. I think this one, to my feeling, it's a bit too overlit. And you see too much of the car. It sounds stupid, but I like to have some mystery in the car, like some nice shadows and some yeah, nicer lines, I suppose. But that one had the messed up window with the reflection of the light, and this one didn't. So I used this one, I think, for the window part, like so. Um, Well, you can see some other angles that I shot. So I like to do wheels head on, so shot from a very low perspective as well. So I typically put my camera in on the same height as where the wheel nut is. So quite low. It's only like what, 30 centimeters or something, not even probably. And like I said, like I really like shooting from low angles, which often gives interesting perspectives. Like here, the wing. Um, let's see what else is there. Some typical examples of detail shots. So the part under the wing. I don't remember exactly how I positioned my light, but I think I moved it to the left. This was a bit zoomed out as well. The hydraulics in the wing, very impressive car in general, really. These didn't work out so well. I had this one, like a more close up of the wing as well. Um, some close-up angles of wheels, which didn't really work out all that amazing. Some detailed shots of the seat cushions with the Weissach back embroidery on it, always nice. And then we get to the interior photos. I will, for reference, use, I think I have it. I will use the same angle. Oh, no, I didn't. I thought I had the other angle from the interior as well, but let's use this one then. Um, as most of you saw during the workshop, interiors are surprisingly easy to do in terms of lighting, um, and they're quite easy in post processing as well. At least I think so. Um, the only obstruction typically is the reflection in your window, which is what we're going to be removing today. I will add a bit of brightness here so you can see more. Up the exposure, like so. And you can see that the final result, so this one, oh, it's actually a combination of multiple pictures. I forgot about that. Let's close this one again. So this is the one I just opened with all the reflections and stuff in the windshield. Oh, I'm just going to turn on my lens profiles here. Computer is getting terribly slow. There we go. So the end result, so this picture is a combination of 90% of this picture, but with the reflections removed from the window. And as you can see, one particularly famous thing about the GT3 RS is those dials on the steering wheel where you can change everything. And those, I believe, come from the other shot, yeah, from this one. So I'll show you with the two exposures combined. So again, I'm going to take this photo and this photo using Command or Control. Right click, edit in, and then do open as layers in Photoshop, and then we wait. In the meantime, I'll check the chat. For having your pictures printed. Gilliam, the preparations for print are fairly limited. Um, the only thing I do, it's actually a good question because it's quite an important one if you decide to go for print or even put stuff on Instagram. And I'll show you with this picture. You're not going to be able to see it very well, but you'll get the idea that I'm talking about. Let's see, something is still showing here. Okay, there we go. One thing that's going to happen if you export this photo to JPEG, for example, is you're going to have a lot of banding in your red light. Not in your car, not in your environment typically, but just in that light because it's artificially created. And when you export to JPEG, because of the compression, it has trouble making that a very smooth gradient. I'm going to see if I can show you an example of my work where it shows. It shows a bit actually on. I did a few quick edits of the Skoda. I don't know if it comes through on the stream, but you can see that there's banding here. So you have all these stripes going from lighter to darker to darker to darker, and that's quite annoying. So definitely on print, it's even worse. I actually had a print printed a while ago, a few weeks ago, one of the Lamborghinis where it was really visible, and I hated it. Um, so there's one thing you definitely want to do, and that is if you grow to your background light, and so that's this layer, the red light here. You wanna, it's gonna sound silly, but you're gonna want to do filter, and then do noise, and do add noise, and depends a bit up to what point you can do it without it becoming really bothersome. But in most cases, I think around 10% is decent. And you can already see in the document that it's creating some kind of noise. So if I disable it, this was the clean version. And if you enable the preview, you see that it's adding a tiny bit of noise. And it seems stupid, but because of adding that noise to your background light, it's going to remove the banding from when you export to JPEG and also to print. Um, Also, if you export to print, um, my suggestion would be to use TIFF as the file format. It's definitely, it doesn't have compression like JPEG does. Well, uncompressed TIFF. And also, if you can, you want to go to 16-bit image mode. So if you go to Photoshop and image and mode, select 16 bits per channel instead of 8. It's definitely gonna have a lot more detail for you, whatever's printing it. If it's your own printer or someone is printing it for you, whatever, it's gonna look better that way for sure. So yeah, um, and that's about it in terms of preparation. Um, we're gonna go back to the interior shots. So in the meantime, the pictures have loaded. So we have two layers here. We have the top one, which is I think the nicest looking one. It has the sort of mysterious lighting. And then the bottom one, which has more details, where we're going to get those dials from the steering wheel out of. But we're going to use this as a base, the mysterious one. So I'm going to put that in the bottom. And I'm quickly going to run and blow my nose because it's about that time. Sorry. 2 seconds. Okay, that's a lot better. Apologies for that. Um, I see. Arno, in the meantime, you also asked the question, what light bar are you using for your shots? I use the non-light Pavo tube, and I think I have the 15C. Yeah. So this one, they're relatively expensive for LED lights, but they are quite nice. You have a lot of freedom in terms of color range, the brightness, and also the saturation. So you can go many different ways. The battery is quite good as well. The only downside, I think, with the non-lights is that there's no way to cover the back unless you use duct tape. I've experimented quite a bit to avoid having the big white streak in pictures. Um, and it doesn't, yeah, the light always comes through the back. So you always have to delete that white streak if you want to keep your environment. But aside from that, I'm quite happy about them. Definitely recommend them. Another light I used to have was the Godox. I think it was the LC500. Yeah, this one. It's a bit cheaper. Battery is definitely better, a lot better. Mine, I have it here somewhere, unfortunately broke recently, so I switched to um, the Pavo tubes. Um, and this is the one I had. I had the bicolor. This one, yeah, the bicolor ones. So it's like only half the price. And an advantage of these ones is that you have this what's it called again? Well, the shutter doors basically that you can close and put behind the light, so you don't see the light when you're moving it over the car. I just heard the battery noise from my AirPods, but according to my Mac, they're still at 50%, so that's good. Um, oh, Ben, Nonlight has a cover for that. No kidding. Okay, I need to look into that. Yeah. Oh, and Arno, I didn't see the bottom portion of what you were saying. Are there any important things to know when choosing one, size, brightness, etc.? I like the fact that the non-lights are a bit longer than the Godox because it gives you nicer, softer shadows. Because the area that you're light painting with, it becomes taller, so the shadows become softer. Um, I think brightness is not as important because you can always compensate by using a longer shutter time or something. I think it's more interesting to have a bit of control over the color temperature because sometimes, like I shot a classic Ferrari a while ago, and I really envisioned the shoot with a nice warm light, not with a blue one. So I had the freedom to, change the temperature of the light to something warmer, which, it's a bit frustrating if you only have one temperature in case you do want to change it specifically for one shoot. So, and thanks, Ben. I'm definitely going to look for that non-light cover. I was going to use duct tape, but okay. All right, back to the interior in the meantime. So again, our main problem with this shot is that really annoying reflection in the window. So on one hand, we have the reflection of the dashboard here on the left, and then here because we've been light painting over the window, you can see the dirt build up, and then what's wiped away by the windshield wiper. So yeah, it doesn't look very clean, and if we look at the final result, depending on how you do it, here I again used the red lighting behind it to keep the same vibe, basically. And there's multiple ways to do it, but I just always go for the same one, and it's very easy. I just select this area, and I add a black layer on top of it, and then I add the light with that mask. So I'm going to do it quite roughly here. I'm going to use our lasso tool again, and just going to sometimes you really have to look carefully because the question is, do you want your windshield wiper in there as well if it's visible, or do you just want blackness out there? But this way I think we do it quite well. Another tip, if you're not going to add your red light, for example, in this thing, is instead of just adding a black layer on top of it, you can just add an adjustment layer and make the reflection a lot darker. The advantage of that is that it's a bit more realistic because if you make it dark but not entirely dark, you still see some details in the windshield of the reflection, which makes it look a bit more real than if it's just dark with a light in the back. I will show you what I mean in a bit. Here it always gets a bit fussy because yeah, this block thing is part of the windshield wiper, so I'm gonna keep that. And that's a windshield wiper as well, I think. There we go. And it may require a bit of tweaking afterwards. Also, the dome lights here, they're a bit distracting, so we might have to take those out. And sometimes when there's a bit too much light or reflection on the retroviseur, the rear view mirror, sometimes I decide to take it out completely. And you would think that people would notice, but most people don't really. They just pay attention to the dashboard and they don't really notice that there's a vital part of the interior missing. And they can be quite distracting sometimes, especially in cleaner interiors. There's a telemetry dashcam here as well, which I'm going to remove while we're at it, because that's just distracting from the essence. So as you can see clearly here, what I've done is I've selected the entire window, basically, so everything that's shining through the window. And then we have one part here, so I'm going to hold Shift again and click, and then I'm going to add this part to the selection. We're going to leave the nice chrono clock in there. Something like this. Again, if it's tough to see with all the darkness, because typically these photos are pretty dark, just add a temporary what's it called, adjustment layer with like a higher brightness so that you can see a bit better. I think it always works a bit, it works better if you can see what you're actually doing. So for this example, I'm just going to create a new layer, so Command Shift N or Control Shift N, and let's call that backdrop again. And we're going to add a layer mask to it, and we're going to say reveal selection, like that. So now we see here in the mask panel that our windshield is white and all the rest is dark. And we're going to layer ourselves, and we're just going to do Option backspace or Alt backspace on Windows and fill that layer with black. And now we have a nice clean black background. It's a bit boring now, hence why I added the red color. As I said, another way of working, what you could do if you don't plan to use a color on top of it, let's delete this for now, turn it off. So if you simply create an adjustment layer with an exposure and you drag the exposure down, so we're going to make it very, very dark. And then we hold Option or Alt while dragging this mask from the backdrop here. So we copy that mask onto the exposure. And now it's only doing the dark thing onto our windshield. So as you can see now, the difference is this was our black one, so now everything is black. And with the exposure one, you still have some details in there. For example, the dirtiness here on the windshield. I don't know if you can see it. That one. And some other stuff. Our telemetry camera is here as well. So it depends a bit on how realistic you want to have it. I personally like the full black look like this, as clean as possible. And I also do the same thing here with the mask that I do for the cars. I put the feather on 1 pixel, so it's a bit blurry and it has a bit more natural feel. And now if we create, for example, our red cigar again, our backlight, So let's take our elliptical marquee tool. I created a new layer and I'm calling it red light, like this. And in this case, I'm going to do a cigar again. So let's move it down a little bit. And let's do filter Gaussian blur. Again, sort of that same radius, 550. And of course, we only want this to be visible behind the car. So in this case, we want it to be shown inside the windshield. So we're doing the same thing again. I'm going to press Option or Alt on Mac, and I'm going to take that layer mask of the windshield and copy it to red light. And then you get something like this. Of course, my selection was not very careful for speed purposes, so it looks a bit blocky now. But this might be a bit too bright also, so you can change the opacity of your layer here to, say, for example, 50%. I think this is what I typically use in my photos. And that gives you a feeling that, you know, the interior was shot in a studio as well. Of course, if you want to have it a bit more realistic, you could select this part as well, so that the red light is coming from out the car on the left side. But yeah. And then of course we have those little detail things that we want to make, that we want to pop out a little bit more. So those dials on the steering wheel. So we still have our other layer here where they're very bright. And we're going to be doing pretty much the same thing that we were doing with the license plate earlier, but in reverse. So we're going to create a layer mask on that layer and hide everything, like so. Probably be good to change the layer style to lighten again, like this. And then we're going to take our brush, or B, and select the white color because we want to paint something in. And again, make sure that your brush is soft, like this, not hard. And we're going to take those dials here and make sure that they're much more visible. Now, in this case, it's quite easy to do. I'm going to make sure that the sides are not coming through as much, but just the buttons. So if you change your color of your brush to black, you can actually remove again from your layer, like so. And in this case, it's I accidentally clicked print. It's actually quite easy to blend those in. It's not always the case. Sometimes the light might have come from another direction and your brain is sort of aware that it's not looking right. So if you can, always try to light paint from the same direction from for your different exposures so that you can use elements intermittently. I just noticed this big white reflection on the glass of the dashboard as well. So we can take that from this layer as well, but for that we have to remove it from lighten to normal because here we're going to actually make it darker. So again, we use the brush with white and we paint over this part. Make the brush a bit bigger, like so. So that we just take the good parts. I painted a little bit of the stock here, which is not really bothering me. But we did go a bit too far here on this part. So I will go back to black and make my brush a bit smaller again. And remove, well, actually I will make it even smaller. And remove this part that we got from that layer that we don't want. So if I click select this mask now, you will see that the only parts that are visible is this, the dashboard, and then here are 4 dials to make them pop out a bit more. Sometimes I have to do this for the emblem on the steering wheel as well, because quite a lot of times the nicest exposure of the interior will have reflections in that emblem, or it will be blown out because it's looking right at the light from the camera perspective. So make sure you have a few exposures there where you can remove the the emblem from your layer. Yeah, and yeah, like I said, the dome lights here, I think they're a bit distracting, so I will quickly have AI find a solution for that. Just select the whole thing, generative field, and generate. Let's see what it comes up with. Well, that's a bit of a fail. Okay, let's ignore that. Bottom line, don't be lazy and remove it yourself because AI is not able to help you with everything. I actually think that the content aware fill will do a pretty good job at getting rid of this. Of course, if you want to make very perfectionist, clean images, don't take my advice. This is like amateur level goofing around in Photoshop right now for speed purposes. Okay, close enough. So yeah, that was an interior, I think. Yeah. I'm going to save this one. I think for this picture, a colder color balance is definitely going to be nicer, because the original image is a bit too warm. And especially if you have a lot of reds in your car and your lighting and stuff, I think it's always quite complimenting to use somewhat of a colder color temperature like so. Um, Now that I see this image, probably a good time to talk about the brightness of your image. Um, Most of the time, I'm editing my photos on my computer in the dark, which is convenient because it allows me to see more details and stuff. But at the same time, it's a bit dangerous because you're looking at um, a very visible, very bright screen. And you have to keep in mind that most people are going to see your pictures just during the day on your phone or whatever, and those pictures are going to look much, much darker to them. So it's a bit of a paradox. I like my pictures to be dark, but quite often I have to go back to Lightroom and decide that the pictures are simply too dark because I looked at them during the daylight, and I have to slide up my exposure slider quite a bit. As you can see, this is already quite a bit more popping. It loses some of the mystique, I would say, of a picture, unfortunately. But yeah, no one likes an almost black picture on Instagram. So it requires a bit of getting used to. I'm still getting used to it. I haven't found the perfect balance yet of having a dark picture that's still light enough. But I have sort of started to develop the habit of dragging that exposure slider higher than I would like. And let's see, my AirPods just bonked out device default. I hope you guys can still hear me. I see my mic thingies going up and down, so that's looking good. If you don't hear me, say something in the chat. But yeah, like I said, it takes a bit of getting used to figuring out the right balance of darkness and still seeing enough detail in your photos. In the meantime, I will go through some other detail shots that I did or attempted. Carbon is notoriously tricky, I find, for light painting, because it's both highly reflective and at the same time, when it's not reflecting anything, it's dark as ass, and it can be quite frustrating. Hence all the attempts here at shooting parts, but not being very fulfilled with them. Here is a front view with the same MO that we did for the other pictures.
a more detailed side view of just the rear, also with the red cigar behind it. There was no floor in this one, so that made it easy. Again, some experimentation with lower angles. I often hang my camera upside down, as you can tell from the fact that I still have to rotate them. This is probably one of my favorite shots of that whole series. Very dynamic shot, looking up, seeing that Porsche logo a little bit, having the red from the lights project onto it as well. I really like that angle. Removed the white reflection from the light here in the final shot, as you can see, made it a bit darker. Contrast is always nice, so I tend to sometimes just paint in shadows, as you can see here. It's a bit overdone, I suppose, but it still gives a bit of a nice aesthetic. And etc. Really hoping you guys can still hear me. Tell me in the chat if you can still hear me. And then there was this one that I put here as well, just to give you an idea of what was in this picture. And it's actually quite similar to, now that I'm seeing it, it's definitely way too dark again because my Lightroom presets were removed, making it a bit brighter. And you can see that it's a picture that I shot at the workshop that I photoshopped into the desert. The desert image I generated with AI, with what's it called again, Midjourney, which it really ended up being a nice complementation to the picture. Picture is still loading, so hang in there with me. It's quite a heavy one. And yeah, it's as you can already tell, this side view is pretty much exactly what we've just done with the Porsche. So I recreated the shadow. There's a slight horizontal blur on it as well, but it's just that pen tool shadow that we created for the side view of the Porsche. It's one exposure. The Huracan, the paint job was, fortunately it was a matte paint job, which in my experience is always a lot easier than reflective paint. It's nice to have bright colors, but in this case the color was not so bright, but it still really worked for light painting. I personally think it's a bit of a downside that the Cerato has those ski things on top. I think it distracts quite a bit from the card. But aside from that, I think it just looks badass, and it worked out quite well. I'm going to add another adjustment layer here for exposures, just so we have a bit more brightness. So yeah, the desert background, if you remove it, I tried a few, and if I disable the mask for the car, like so, you can see the original setting. So fortunately there was not a lot of work on the car itself. I think the shot was quite nice. One exposure, not multiple ones. I do think I darkened the windows. Yep, I had a exposure layer set up for the windows. So if I turn it on and off, you can see it changing. I think, not sure what this is. Probably some cleaning up around the car. And oh yeah, I darkened the ski thing on top a little bit as well to make it stand out a bit less. Otherwise, it was really grabbing a lot of attention. I think this was another exposure. Yeah, this was one where the windows had the reflection in it. Ended up not using that, and just used this more simple one, and then just added the desert below it, added the shadow, and that was it basically. Quite straightforward in terms of post-processing. You wouldn't think so, but again, yeah, I also removed the moon because I compressed the desert image, and you can see that the moon turned into somewhat of a squashed banana. And yeah, I still really like this series, although it's AI generated, but I think it works out quite well. Oh man. You still see Lightroom, not Photoshop. Your screen is blocked on Lightroom. Crap. Oh yeah, I see it now. Let me check. I'm going to... How about now? Is there sound? I see my little bars going up, so I feel like it should work. Oh, okay. So I'm guessing that worked. All right, good. Let's do that again, shall we? Like I said, I should really give you guys my number so you can call me when things are turning to shit. To be on the safe side, I'm going to do this so I can still see the chat in the background. I would use two screens, but I'm sure that would kill my computer. So what was I saying? Right, so this is the image. And if you look at the image in general, it's very identical to the one we did, the side view of the Porsche. So we have that side view, one exposure. We drew a shadow there. Let me find the shadow. Here it is. See, the wheels are a bit blurry at the bottom, and then they sort of fall nicely into the shadow that I drew. The shadow is blurry on the left and right as well, so we have that motion blur horizontal going on. And then we have our desert. So now I turned on the exposure to make it a bit brighter, but it's a bit too bright. Let's turn it down a bit. So like I said, the desert was simply AI generated. So this is just the car, and this is the original setting, as you can see in the workshop in Brussels. It's I was a bit lucky with the photo. It was a nice exposure, came out perfectly. I didn't have to combine it with other exposures, and it's a matte car, so that makes it a lot easier. And I also, some adjustments I made was to the ski bar on top. So this was the original one where it was quite bright, and I just made it a bit darker with an exposure layer. Same for the window, which I darkened down a little bit. and this was one other exposure that I took where you had a reflection in the window and in the front bumper that I thought was distracting, so I didn't use that one. You could use it, and you could just use AI or content aware fill to remove it from the window again and here from the bumper, or to at least darken it down a little bit. But I had my exposure that I was happy with in the first place. So if you turn on the mask again, let me know, by the way, if you guys would like to have the source files so you can play with it. Maybe it's boring for you, but maybe some of you think it's interesting to see the adjustments and to have the right values that I use here and there, and I can share it with you in a WeTransfer or something. So yeah, as I said while I was yapping away, while you could only see Lightroom, I also removed the moon here in Lightroom afterwards, because I compressed the desert background quite a bit. It was a lot taller, but I made it because the angle was again quite low, so I had to make the background flatter basically. And you can see it on the moon here that it's not exactly a natural shape. So I think originally it was more something like this, but I changed it in such a way that it appeared realistic. Because if you look at it now, part of your brain already goes like, that doesn't make all too much sense, although it's actually not too bad. But for example, for the Porsche, from that really low angle, you couldn't do it this way, because you would have to make your image much more flat, so you're looking at that low angle. Yeah, that's about all I can say, I guess, about that picture, I think. And I think that concludes what I was going to show you. It's 9 o'clock. We took 2 hours to go through it. Yeah, I think it's question time and request time. While I might blow my nose a little bit more. Hope it's not COVID. Jeez, how much delay is on that thing? All right, cool. Nice to see you, Billy. It's I always think of my workflow as surprisingly minimalist, I would say. I don't like. Oh wow! While we were doing the webinar, Lewis Hamilton is confirmed for Ferrari. Sorry. Wow. Sorry, that threw me off. Yeah, I don't like complex workflows and stuff, so I really, it took me a while, I think, to figure out my kind of workflow, and I like, yeah, being able to do the same thing every time, but always a little bit different. Yep. Yeah, I actually, I think one of my inspirations for doing the course back in the day was because of Mo. I really like how he explains things, and I love YouTube and I love watching YouTube. It takes a lot of time to screen record and to edit and stuff. So I haven't really had the time for it yet. But yeah, and maybe together with some other people, it could be fun to do some series of these. But I'm glad you guys liked it. You have my email, so if you come up with other questions, I will share the source files in the first place. And well, you can rewatch the video on YouTube. And then if you have questions, just send me an email or hit me up, and I will gladly answer them. So I hope from the start of the workshop last week until the end of this one, you learned something and it was interesting. It was really interesting working with you all, and I had a lot of fun. So thank you. Yep, absolutely. I can only see the top part of the chat. Say something so it goes up a little bit. Here gets new engines. What does Lewis Hamilton know about Ferrari? Yeah, I'm wondering as well. I think it's 26 that they're getting the new engines. 25 is, I think, still the same ones. I think. I'm hesitating now. I think he always said he wanted to drive for Ferrari before he retires, and I think everyone just kind of took it as a joke, but he actually did it. My God. Yeah, shock of the day. Anyway, I'll close up shop here because probably the last thing you want to see me do on your very valuable Thursday night at 9 p.m. is see me talk about Lewis Hamilton and stuff. Again, pleasure to have you all. If you have questions, email me. I will send you the files, and maybe see you at the next one or anywhere. Have a nice evening. And now I need to figure out how to shut this down. There we go.